The phantom heat at the base of Ilara's collarbone had not faded. If anything, it had settled into a low, persistent thrum, like a second heartbeat sinking to a rhythm she couldn't quite understand. She stood in the main executive conference room, adjusting the cuffs of her blazer for the third time. The massive, polished obsidian table reflected the soft, ambient lighting, and in the center, the three-dimensional holographic model of the obsidian tower hummed quietly, casting a faint blue glow across the room. Julian Croft was pacing near the window, wiping a sheen of sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. He looked like a man awaiting a firing squad. "He's coming!" Julian muttered, checking his watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. "The board members are already seated in the adjacent antechamber. They'll join us in 2 minutes. Just remember what I said, Ilara. He's particular. Don't let him rattle you." Ilara turned to him, offering a calm, reassuring smile. "I've presented to city zoning boards, hostile investors and architects who thought they invented the concept of load-bearing walls. Julian, I can handle one eccentric billionaire." "It's not eccentricity I'm worried about," Julian said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It's his ruthlessness. He doesn't just reject ideas, Ilara, he dismantles the people who propose them." Before Ilara could respond, the heavy mahogany doors at the far end of the room swung open. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air grew several degrees colder. The ambient hum of the city outside seemingly muted by the sheer oppressive weight of the presence that walked through the threshold. Kalen Thorne entered. He was flanked by 3 older men in impeccably tailored suits, the board of directors, but Ilara's eyes were drawn, inevitably, magnetically to Kale. The man who had stepped into the room was not the man she had met in the sub-basement. The raw, primal intensity was gone. The dark, molten heat in his eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a flat, glacial indifference. His posture was rigid, his expression a mask of polite, corporate detachment. He didn't look at her. He didn't acknowledge the lingering tension in the room. He walked to the head of the table, pulled out the heavy leather chair, and sat down with a smooth, effortless grace. "Mr. Pendleton, Mr. Hayes, Mr. Vance," Kale said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone that carried perfectly in the quiet room. He gestured to the empty chairs. "Please, be seated." The board members took their seats, casting curious, slightly apprehensive glances at Ilara. Julian scurried to his usual spot near the holographic projector, looking as though he might faint. Ilara stood her ground at the foot of the table. She felt a sharp, confusing spike of disappointment. Part of her, the irrational part that had been haunted by the electric shock of his touch, had hoped for a flicker of recognition, a nod. Anything. Instead, she was looking at a stranger. "Miss Vance," Kale said, finally turning his gaze toward her. His eyes were dark, empty pools. "Julian informs me you have prepared a preliminary vision for the Obsidian Tower's core integration. The floor is yours." It was a dismissal, a cold, formal invitation to perform. Ilara swallowed the sudden lump in her throat. She straightened her spine, lifting her chin. She was Ilara Vance. She had clawed her way back from professional ruin. She would not let this man's sudden ice age intimidate her. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice crisp and projecting effortlessly to the back of the room. She stepped forward, tapping the console to bring the holographic model to life. The tower expanded, its layers peeling back to reveal the intricate internal schematics. As we discussed briefly earlier, the Obsidian Tower cannot simply be a monument to glass and steel, Ilara began, her tone shifting into the confident, authoritative cadence of a master at work. "It must be a living, breathing ecosystem. My proposal centers on a centralized geothermal exchange system located here in the primary load-bearing core." She manipulated the hologram, highlighting the central shaft in a warm, pulsing gold. "By routing the thermal conduits through the geometric center of the structure, we reduce the length of the primary piping by 30%. This isn't just an aesthetic choice, it's a mathematical imperative. It lowers material costs, minimizes the risk of pressure degradation, and creates a natural, radiant heating baseline for the entire 70-story structure. Furthermore, I've reinforced the seismic bracing around this core, ensuring that even in a magnitude 8.0 earthquake, the thermal integrity of the building remains uncompromised." She paused, letting the data sink in. The board members were leaning forward, their expressions shifting from skepticism to genuine interest. Mr. Pendleton nodded slowly, adjusting his glasses. Additionally, Alara continued, walking around the table to stand closer to the projection. The spatial flow of the executive suites has been redesigned to maximize natural light while utilizing smart glass technology to maintain absolute privacy. The building will feel open, grounded, and secure. It will be a fortress that happens to be beautiful. She finished her pitch, the hologram settling into a steady, glowing rotation. She turned to face Kalen, her heart beating a steady, confident rhythm. She had nailed it. It was flawless. For a long, agonizing moment, Kale said nothing. He simply stared at the hologram, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he lifted his gaze to meet hers. "An interesting fantasy, Ms. Vance?" he said softly. The words were delivered with such polite, devastating calm that it took Alara a second to process them. "I beg your pardon?" she asked, her voice tightening. Kale leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "A fantasy. You speak of this building as if it were a living organism. You propose tearing up 3 months of foundational work to install a geothermal core based on theoretical savings and aesthetic whimsy. You call it a mathematical imperative. I call it a costly vanity project." Ilara's eyes narrowed. "The math is sound, Mr. Thorne. I can provide the structural engineering reports to prove." "I don't need reports to tell me when a design is reckless," Kale interrupted, his voice dropping a fraction of an octave, turning icy. "I reviewed your portfolio before this meeting. Your work at your previous firm was adequate. But adequate does not build the obsidian tower. What I see in this proposal is a fundamental lack of discipline. You are prioritizing your own desire to leave a legacy over the practical financial realities of this project." The air left the room. Julian made a small, choked sound. Mr. Pendleton shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Ilara felt a hot flush of anger rise up her neck, but she forced her face to remain a mask of cool professionalism. "With respect, Mr. Thorne, my previous firm's failures were not due to a lack of discipline. They were due to leadership that prioritized short-term profits over structural integrity. I am offering you a building that will last a century." "And I am offering you a reality check," Kale replied, his tone utterly devoid of empathy. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a single crisp sheet of paper, sliding it across the polished obsidian table. It stopped perfectly in front of Ilara. "The board and I have decided to terminate your role as lead architect, effective immediately," Kale stated. The words fell like guillotine blades. "We will be retaining Sterling and Croft from New York to oversee the project. They have the experience and the discipline this tower requires." Ilara stared at the paper, her vision blurred for a fraction of a second. Terminate. The word echoed in her mind, triggering a visceral, painful flashback to Marcus, to the smear campaign, to the 2 years of grinding, humiliating freelance work. "No," she told herself fiercely. "Not again. You are not a victim." "However," Kale continued, his voice smooth, almost bored, "given your enthusiasm for the project, we are willing to offer you a remote junior consulting position. You will assist the New York firm with minor CAD revisions and data entry. The compensation is $5,000 a month. It is non-negotiable." $5,000 a month for a lead architect of her caliber. It was an insult. It was a deliberate, calculated slap in the face. It was designed to humiliate her, to make her so angry, so offended, that she would storm out of the room and never look back. And it was working. But Ilara Vance did not storm. She did not cry. She did not let the trembling in her hands show. She looked down at the contract, then slowly she looked up at Kalen Thorne. She searched his eyes, looking for a flicker of the man from the basement, looking for a hint of the intense, burning connection that had crackled between them in the dark. There was nothing. Only cold, flat, impenetrable ice. A strange, cold clarity washed over her. The disappointment vanished, replaced by a sharp, crystalline fury. He wasn't just rejecting her work. He was trying to break her. He was trying to make her small. Well, she had spent 2 years being small. She was done. Ilara reached out and picked up the single sheet of paper. She didn't tear it. She didn't crumple it. She folded it neatly, precisely, in half, and then in half again until it was a small, dense square. She placed it gently back on the table, right at the edge of Kale's reach. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Thorne," Ilara said. Her voice was dangerously quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. It was the voice of a woman who had just found her footing on solid ground. Kale's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "I assume you will be accepting the consulting role then?" Ilara let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Accepting? No. I don't do remote data entry, Mr. Thorne. And I certainly don't work for men who mistake vision for negligence and who use their wealth as a blunt instrument to mask their own lack of imagination. A collective gasp rippled through the board members. Julian closed his eyes, looking as though he wished the floor would swallow him whole. Cale's eyes darkened. For a split second, the ice cracked, and Ilara saw a flash of something raw and furious beneath the surface, but it was gone in an instant. "You are making a mistake, Ms. Vance," Cale said, his voice dropping to a low, threatening register. "This is the most prestigious commission on the West Coast. If you walk out of this room, you will be blacklisted. No firm in this city will touch you." Ilara smiled. It was a cold, sharp, predatory smile that mirrored the one she had worn when she first walked into the Ignis Holdings lobby. "Mr. Thorne," she said, leaning forward slightly, placing her hands flat on the obsidian table. "I was blacklisted 2 years ago by a man who stole my work and called it his own. I survived it. I rebuilt my career from the ground up, without the backing of a billionaire safety net. Do you really think a petty threat from a man who hides in a penthouse scares me?" She straightened up, gathering her portfolio and her tablet. She looked at the board members, her gaze steady and unyielding. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice ringing with absolute conviction, "you are about to hand over a $200 million project to a firm that will build you a glass tomb. When the thermal expansion cracks your foundation in year 3 and your seismic bracing fails, don't say I didn't warn you." She turned her back on Cale Thorne. "Ms. Vance," Cale's voice called out, a fraction louder this time, laced with a strange, desperate edge. Ilara paused at the door, her hand on the heavy brass handle. She didn't turn around. "If you leave," Cale said, his voice tight, "you leave with nothing." Ilara glanced over her shoulder, meeting his gaze one last time. The phantom heat at her collarbone flared, a sharp, painful reminder of what could have been. "I'm leaving with my dignity, Mr. Thorne," she said softly, "and my integrity. You can keep your tower." She pushed the door open and stepped out into the hallway, pulling it shut behind her with a solid, definitive click. Inside the boardroom, the silence was absolute. Cale sat frozen in his chair. His hands were gripping the edge of the obsidian table so tightly that his knuckles were bone-white. Beneath the polished surface of the wood, his fingernails dug in, threatening to splinter the expensive material. The dragon inside him was screaming. It was a soundless, agonizing roar of grief and rage, thrashing against the ice walls he had built, demanding he run after her, demand he fall to his knees and beg her forgiveness, demand he claim her and burn the world to ash to keep her safe. "Go after her," the beast roared. "She is ours. We are killing her." "We are saving her," Cale answered silently, his mind a chaotic storm of self-loathing and resolve. "She hates me. She will leave Seattle. She will be safe." But as he stared at the closed mahogany doors, listening to the fading, confident click of Ilara Vance's heels echoing down the hallway, Cale Thorne knew, with a terrifying absolute certainty, that he had just made the greatest mistake of his immortal life, and he was going to have to find a way to live with the ashes.